The apartment was filled with a soft light that Saturday morning. Claire, her hair tied back and dressed in comfortable clothes, was organizing the final details of the wedding decorations that would take place in just a few days. On the table, an open notebook displayed a carefully scribbled to-do list. Sophie, sitting on the living room rug with colored pencils and scattered sheets of paper, was happily drawing a family. A tall figure in a dress, Claire, a smaller one in pants and a tie, Ethan, and a tiny one with ribbons in her hair, herself. "Mommy, look!" Sophie exclaimed, holding the drawing up proudly. "That's me carrying the rings." Claire smiled, sitting next to her and taking the paper gently. "It's perfect, my love. You're going to be the most beautiful flower girl ever." Sophie grinned with satisfaction, returning to her drawings. Claire took a deep breath, looking around the apartment. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The sense of peace was palpable, something she had fought so hard to achieve. Then the doorbell rang. Claire frowned, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. Sophie, distracted, didn't even notice as her mother walked to the door. When Claire opened it, the shock froze her in place. Margaret, her mother, stood there with her usual impeccable posture and a neutral yet severe expression as always. Dressed in an elegant coat and carrying an expensive handbag, Margaret scanned Claire from head to toe before speaking. "Claire, Mom, what are you doing here? Can't I visit my own daughter?" Margaret replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Claire closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath before turning on her heels and shutting the door. The living room felt smaller with Margaretha's presence as she glanced around as though searching for something to criticize. Her eyes fell on the drawings scattered on the floor. "I see you still live in chaos." Claire ignored the comment, picking up Sophie's drawings and carefully placing them on the table. "You could have told me you were coming and missed the chance to see how you're doing." Margaret sat on the sofa, crossing her legs elegantly. "I heard you're getting married." Claire paused, feeling the weight of her mother's gaze. "Yes, I'm getting married. To that man." Margaretha's voice held a subtle tone of disdain. "After everything you've been through, I thought you'd be more careful with your choices." The words hit Claire hard, but she forced herself not to react. She turned and faced her mother firmly. "Ethan is a good man, Mom. He respects me, loves Sophie, and has brought us peace." Margaret raised an eyebrow as if the response didn't convince her. "Men always seem good at first, Claire. You know that better than anyone." Claire's heart tightened. For a moment, she felt the old fear creeping back in. The fear of making mistakes, of not being good enough, of failing to protect her daughter. But then she looked at Sophie, who was still happily drawing, oblivious to what was happening. Claire took a deep breath. "I'm not the same person anymore, Mom. I know what I want, and I know I'm making the right choice." Margaret didn't reply immediately. She simply stood up, adjusting her coat. "I hope you're right, because when this goes wrong, I don't want to hear 'I told you so.'" Claire felt a quiet anger rise but controlled it. She walked to the door and opened it, a clear gesture for her mother to leave. "Thank you for coming, Mom, but now I need to finish preparing." Margaret hesitated for a second, studying her daughter as if trying to decipher her. Finally, she left without saying another word, leaving only the soft sound of her heels echoing in the hallway. Claire closed the door and leaned against it, shutting her eyes. The weight of that visit still lingered in the air. "Mommy!" Sophie's sweet voice brought her back. The little girl held her drawing with tiny hands and looked at her with concern. "Are you sad?" Claire smiled softly, sitting on the floor and pulling Sophie into a hug. "No, sweetheart. I'm okay. Sometimes people say things that hurt, but we don't have to believe them." Sophie looked at her with curiosity. "But you said you're marrying Uncle Ethan. That's good, right?" Claire smiled wider, kissing her daughter's forehead. "It's wonderful, my love, and the three of us are going to be very happy." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to drawing. Claire watched her for a moment, still feeling the lingering weight of the visit, though it was lighter now. Ethan was right. She had come so far to get here, and no one would take away the peace she had earned. That night, sitting on the sofa with a warm cup of tea in her hands, Claire told Ethan about the visit. He listened in silence, his expression calm, but his eyes filled with concern. "She still gets to you, doesn't she?" Claire sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "No matter how hard I try, it's like part of me still looks for her approval. And I know it'll never happen." Ethan wrapped an arm around her, holding her gently. "You don't need her approval, Claire. Look at everything you've achieved. You're an amazing mother, a strong and courageous woman. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." Claire closed her eyes, letting his words sink in like a bomb. "Thank you, Ethan. Sometimes I just need to hear that." He kissed the top of her head. "Whenever you need it, I'll be here." Claire smiled, feeling lighter. Maybe her mother's words still hurt, but they no longer had the same power. For the first time, Claire knew she was in control of her own life. The next morning, the sun timidly peeked through the apartment window. Claire sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring a spoon in her coffee cup, her gaze lost somewhere far away. Sophie, seated on the other side of the table, played with her cereal, humming softly to herself. "Mommy, aren't you going to eat?" Her daughter's voice brought Claire back to the present. She forced a smile and gently ran her hand through Sophie's hair. "Mommy isn't hungry right now, sweetheart. Everything's okay." Sophie looked at her for a moment, with that observant look only children have, but soon returned to playing with her cereal. Ethan walked into the kitchen, adjusting his tie. One glance at Claire and he immediately noticed the weight on her face. "You didn't sleep well." Claire nodded, letting out a heavy sigh. "I spent the night replaying everything my mother said yesterday. I don't know why I still let her affect me so much." Ethan sat down beside her, moving closer. "Because she's your mother, and no matter how much you know she's wrong, her words still touch the places that hurt." Claire rested her forehead in her hands, frustrated. "I hate that she still has this power over me." Ethan took her hands gently, making her look into his eyes. "Then take that power away from her, Claire. You've done an amazing job rebuilding your life. Maybe it's time to talk to Anna again." Claire hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "You're right. It's time to resolve this once and for all." Anna's office was simple and welcoming, with soft lighting and a comfortable armchair where Claire now sat. Anna, with her calm and empathetic demeanor, listened carefully as Claire recounted her mother's visit. "It was like I traveled back in time. For years, I tried to do everything the way she wanted. And even now, after everything, I still hear that old voice in my head telling me I'm not good enough." Anna nodded, choosing her words carefully. "That voice isn't yours, Claire. It's hers, the voice you internalized over the years." Claire lowered her gaze, tears beginning to form. "Why do I still need her approval so much? I'm a grown woman. I'm rebuilding my life. I have Ethan. I have Sophie. Why does it still hurt?" Anna offered a small, knowing smile, the patience of someone who had heard similar stories many times. "Because we're human, Claire. We want to be seen and accepted by our parents. The problem is that sometimes our parents don't know how to give us that. Margareth did what she knew how to do, but that doesn't mean you need to carry her burden." Anna positioned small figures on the family constellation table. She placed one figure representing Claire and another for Margareth. Margaretha's figure was positioned behind Claire, as someone who belongs to her system but doesn't dominate it. "What do you see here?" Anna asked. Claire studied the pieces for a moment, feeling the impact of the image. "She's behind me, like someone who came before." "Exactly," Anna said softly. "Margareth is your mother. You come from her, but you don't have to live for her. The path is yours now. When you accept your mother as she is, with all her flaws and limitations, you free yourself. Not to forget her, but to take your place as her daughter. Claire felt the weight of Anna's words. How do I do that? Say this internally. Mom, you did what you could with what you knew. I am your daughter, but the path ahead is mine. Claire closed her eyes and took a deep breath, repeating the words softly. Mom, you did what you could with what you knew. I am your daughter, but the path ahead is mine. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief. For the first time, she felt like she was letting go of a weight that was never hers to carry. Anna watched her with a warm smile. How do you feel? Claire wiped her tears, smiling faintly. Lighter. For the first time in a long time, I feel lighter. When Claire returned home that evening, Sophie greeted her with a tight hug, as if she knew her mother needed it. Mommy, look, I made another drawing. Claire took the paper, smiling as she saw a new picture of herself, Sophie, and Ethan, all holding hands under a sunny sky. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Ethan walked over, noticing the calmer look on Claire's face. How was it with Anna? Claire took a deep breath, feeling her heart at ease. It was freeing. My mother is my mother, Ethan. But the path ahead is mine. He smiled, pulling her into a loving hug. I knew you'd find your strength again. Claire looked at Sophie playing on the rug, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. I'm ready. Nothing's going to ruin this wedding. Ethan kissed her forehead, whispering, I'm here. Always. It was late afternoon, and Claire was leaving work with a clear mind, thinking about the final preparations for the wedding. As she walked toward her car, she suddenly felt a familiar presence. Her body stiffened instantly. Turning slowly, she saw Adam leaning against the hood of her car, arms crossed and wearing an expression that mixed irritation with a hint of irony. Claire, what a coincidence seeing you here. She stopped at a safe distance, her voice firm. What are you doing here, Adam? He smiled, a smile Claire knew well, the one he wore when he thought he had the upper hand. We need to talk? No, we don't. Claire tried to move toward her car, but Adam stepped in her path, his voice now sharper. This is about Sophie. She stopped, holding his gaze steadily. What about Sophie? Adam took a step closer, lowering his voice as if trying to intimidate her. Do you really think this marriage is good for her? Putting a stranger in the role of her father. Do you think that's what our daughter needs? The words hit Claire, but they didn't break her. She felt anger rising, but alongside it, there was also a strength she hadn't known she had before. Ethan isn't taking your place, Adam. He's here because he chooses to be. Something you never truly did. Adam laughed sarcastically. You've always been so quick to blame me, haven't you? It won't take long for that Ethan to figure out you're not worth the effort. Claire didn't move. She stared him in the eyes. For the first time, she felt no fear. His words no longer carried the weight they once did. If you came here to make me doubt myself, Adam, you've wasted your time. You have no power over me anymore. Not over my life. Not over Sophie's life. Adam started to speak again, but Claire cut him off. Now get out of my way. And next time you want to talk, you can speak to my lawyer. She stepped past him, opened the car door, and got in. Through the window, she saw Adam standing there, frustrated and powerless. He hadn't expected Claire to be this strong. As she drove home, Claire let out a deep breath, feeling her heart still racing. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but deep down she knew it. Not giving in to Adam's control was a victory. When Claire got home, she found Ethan in the kitchen cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, bringing a comforting contrast to the day's tension. Ethan looked up and immediately noticed the serious expression on Claire's face. What happened? Claire placed her bag on the table and took a steadying breath. I ran into Adam in the parking lot at work. He tried to intimidate me again. Tried to use Sophie to get to me. Ethan put the spoon down, his face tightening with concern. He did what? Calm down. I didn't let him get to me. Not this time. Ethan walked over and took her hands in his, holding them gently. What did he say? Claire looked into his eyes, calmer than she expected to be. That you'll leave when you realize I'm not worth the effort. Ethan frowned, clearly upset. Claire, that's ridiculous. He's only trying to tear you down because he's lost control. Claire nodded, squeezing his hand softly. I know. For the first time, I know. Today, when he tried to belittle me, I realized his words don't have power over me anymore. He can try all he wants, but he won't stop me. Ethan smiled slightly, admiration filling his eyes. You're incredible, Claire. He can try, but he'll never bring you down again. Claire smiled, feeling Ethan's warmth and support like a shield around her. We've come so far, Ethan. I'm not letting anyone take this from us. He kissed her hands and whispered, Neither am I. Later that evening, as Ethan tucked Sophie into bed, Claire sat beside her daughter, who clung tightly to her stuffed bear. Mommy, are you happy? Sophie asked, her innocent eyes searching her face. Claire smiled, brushing her fingers gently along her daughter's cheek. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy's very happy. And Uncle Ethan is happy too. Very happy. Sophie smiled, relaxing against her pillow. Then I'm happy too. When you're both okay, I'm okay. Claire felt a silent tear slip down her cheek, but it was one of gratitude. She kissed Sophie's forehead and whispered, You are the most important thing in my life, Sophie. And you always will be. Good night, Mommy. Good night, my love. Claire turned off the light and softly closed the door. As she turned around, Ethan was waiting in the hallway, a tender look in his eyes. She's incredible, just like her mom. Claire laughed softly, leaning her head against his chest. The three of us are incredible. Together, Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as Claire felt, more than ever, that nothing could take away the peace and love they had built. It was nighttime. The apartment was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Claire sat on the sofa, a wedding planning notebook open on her lap, but she couldn't focus. The preparations were almost complete, and the wedding was only a few days away. Yet a wave of anxiety was rising inside her. What if everything goes wrong? What if I can't hold on to this new life? What if Ethan gives up on me? The doubts whispered like old voices, bringing back memories of the times when she felt small, incapable, and invisible. Claire closed her eyes, running her hands over her face. She knew these were just shadows of the past. But why did they feel so present now? The sound of soft footsteps pulled Claire back to the present. Ethan appeared in the hallway, wearing a simple t-shirt and looking concerned. Claire, is everything okay? She tried to smile, but he saw through the effort. Sitting next to her on the sofa, he waited patiently for her to speak. I don't know what's happening, Ethan. Everything is ready for the wedding, and it should all feel perfect, but... She hesitated, looking at her hands. But I feel like something could go wrong. Like I don't deserve all this happiness. Ethan gently took her hand, giving it a soft squeeze. Claire, listen to me. The past tried to break you so many times, but you won. You rebuilt your life for yourself and for Sophie. And now here you are, about to start a new chapter. You deserve this, Claire. You deserve to be happy. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. But what if I fail again? Ethan smiled tenderly, cupping her face. You won't fail, because now you have the strength the past tried to take from you. And you have me. We're in this together, Claire. Always. Claire let out a deep breath, feeling the tightness in her chest begin to ease. Thank you, Ethan. I needed to hear that. He kissed her forehead and whispered, Whenever you need it. The next morning, sunlight gently filled the living room. Claire was in the kitchen, making breakfast, when Sophie walked in, still in her pajamas and holding her stuffed bear. Good morning, Mommy. Claire smiled, kneeling down to hug her. Good morning, my princess. Did you sleep well? Sophie nodded, sitting at the table and grabbing a cookie. She looked at Claire curiously. "Mommy, are you happy about the wedding?" The question took Claire by surprise. She sat next to her daughter, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" Sophie bit her cookie thoughtfully. "I dreamed you were sad, and I don't want you to be sad." Claire felt a wave of deep emotion hearing Sophie's words. It was as if her daughter could see right through her, as if she knew about the internal battles Claire was fighting. She took the little girl's hand and answered sincerely, "Sophie, sometimes, even when we're really happy, we feel a little bit scared. But you know what?" Sophie's eyes widened with curiosity. "What?" "I have you, and that makes me stronger than any fear." Sophie smiled, satisfied, and hugged Claire tightly. "And you have Uncle Ethan too." Claire laughed softly, her heart feeling lighter. "Yes, and with the two of you, I'm the happiest person in the world." That afternoon, Claire decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time. She picked up a blank notebook and sat on the apartment balcony, where she could feel the fresh breeze and hear the sounds of a city. With a cup of tea beside her, she opened the notebook and began to write. "Dear Claire, you've come so far. There was a time when it seemed impossible to imagine a life like this, a life full of peace, love, and the certainty that the future can be good. But here you are, and it's not because of luck. You fought for this. You grew, and you deserve every bit of it." She continued, letting the words flow straight from her heart. "Fear will still show up from time to time, like an old friend you no longer need to invite inside. Leave it at the door, because now you know who you are, and you have everything you need." When she finished, Claire closed the notebook, feeling a lightness in her chest. The doubts were still there, but now they seemed smaller, like shadows fading under the light. Ethan arrived a few minutes later and found Claire sitting peacefully, gazing out at the horizon. "Are you okay?" She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I am. I just needed to remind myself of everything I've accomplished." Ethan smiled, kissing the top of her head. "I told you you're stronger than you think." The sun had already set, and Claire's apartment was filled with boxes, bags, and scattered decorations. A white dress hung in the closet, its quiet shimmer a reminder of the big day ahead, while Claire sat on the floor, an open wedding notebook in her lap. Sophie, sitting beside her, was more excited than ever, playing with the artificial flowers meant for the decorations. "Mommy, I'm going to carry the rings like this," Sophie said, holding a decorated pillow and walking with exaggerated steps. Claire laughed, pausing her writing for a moment. "Like that, you'll be the funniest and most beautiful flower girl in the world." Sophie beamed at the compliment, happily running off to the living room to keep rehearsing her role. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Claire opened the door to find Lindsay, her closest friend and maid of honor, carrying a cardboard box. "I brought the glasses for the toast and the cards you asked for," Lindsay said, walking in without ceremony. Claire hugged her, relieved. "You're a lifesaver, Lindsay." "I know," Lindsay replied with a playful wink. "But look at you, Claire. You look like you've run a marathon." Claire smiled tiredly, reaching for some ribbon to close a box. "I'm fine. I just want everything to be perfect." Lindsay stopped, crossed her arms, and raised an eyebrow. "Claire, breathe. The wedding is already perfect because it's with Ethan. Everything else is just details." Claire paused for a moment, letting her friend's words sink in. "You're right. I just need to enjoy the moment." Lindsay smiled triumphantly and, as if by magic, pulled a bottle of wine and 2 glasses from her bag. "Exactly. And the moment starts now. A toast to the eve of your big day." Claire laughed, taking a glass and clinking it against Lindsay's. "To the wedding, and to the most efficient friend in the world, to the perfectly imperfect details," Lindsay added, making Claire burst into laughter. While Sophie sang softly from the other room, Claire felt her heart lighten. For a moment, everything truly felt like it was in its place. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep and Lindsay had left, the apartment returned to silence. Claire sat alone in the living room, staring at the dress hanging in the closet. Slowly, she approached it, running her fingers along the delicate fabric as though she were touching a symbol of everything she had fought to achieve. For a moment, her mind drifted to the past. The dark days, the hidden tears, the fear of never truly finding happiness. The words of Margaret and Adam still echoed faintly somewhere in the corners of her mind, but they didn't hold the same weight anymore. Claire took a deep breath, glancing around the room filled with boxes of flowers and cards. All of it wasn't just for the wedding. It was for the new beginning she had fought so hard to build. "I did it," she whispered softly. "After everything, I did it." She turned off the light and walked to the bedroom, where Ethan was already lying down, reading a book. "Did you finish the checklist?" he asked, watching her sit at the edge of the bed. Claire looked at him and smiled, her eyes still glistening with emotion. "Yes, everything's ready." Ethan closed the book and took her hand in his. "And you? Are you ready?" Claire nodded, her heart full of warmth. More than ever, Ethan smiled, kissing her hand softly. "I can't wait to see you walking down that aisle." Claire laughed quietly, lying beside him. "Me too. I can't wait for what comes after." The two lay there in silence, wrapped in each other's arms, as the calm night seemed to promise that something wonderful was about to happen. The next morning, Claire decided to spend the day with Sophie, savoring the tranquility before the big event. They went to a nearby park, where Sophie ran joyfully through the grass, holding a kite that Claire helped her launch. The wind blew strong, lifting the kite higher and higher. As Claire watched her daughter, she felt a deep peace. This is the life I always wanted. Simple, full of love, and free of fear. Sophie ran back to her, holding the kite string. "Mommy, look, it's flying so high." Claire knelt down to watch the kite in the sky and smiled. "Sometimes, we just need to let go for things to fly high, don't we?" Sophie, with her innocent manner, nodded without fully understanding, but smiled and hugged her mother tightly. "I love you, Mommy." Claire held her daughter close, tears filling her eyes. "I love you too, sweetheart." More than anything in the world, the sun bathed them both in a warm light, like a silent promise that the future would be exactly what Claire deserved. Light, full of love and at peace. The first light of day slipped gently through the cracks in the window. The apartment was quieter than usual, as if the whole world were holding its breath for the calm of that special morning. Claire slowly opened her eyes, her heart racing. For a moment, she lay there, staring at the ceiling and letting the reality sink in. Her wedding day had arrived. She turned over and saw that Ethan was no longer in bed. On the pillow, there was a small handwritten note. "See you at the altar. I can't wait. With love, Ethan." Claire smiled, tears welling up almost instantly. She held the note against her chest for a moment, breathing deeply to steady her emotions. "You've got this, Claire. This is your day." In the living room, Lindsay was already there, organizing the final boxes and double-checking the day's details. When Claire entered the room, dressed in her white robe, Lindsay grinned and raised a cup of coffee in the air. "Good morning, future Mrs. Ethan. I brought strong coffee because I knew you'd need it." Claire chuckled, taking the cup and sitting down beside her friend. "Thank you, Lindsay. I barely slept. It felt like my mind wouldn't shut off." Lindsay looked at her with gentle affection. "That's normal, Claire. You're about to live one of the most important days of your life. It's a lot of emotion for one night of sleep to hold." Claire nodded, staring out the window. "You know what's funny? Even after everything I've been through, even knowing Ethan is the right man for me, I still feel that flutter of fear in my chest. It's like part of me is still waiting for something to go wrong." Lindsay placed her coffee cup on the table and took Claire's hand. "Claire, you're not in the past anymore. Look around you, you built this. You chose love, peace, and happiness. Nothing will go wrong. Today is your day. Claire smiled, letting Lindsay's words wash over her heart. Thank you, Lindsay. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd probably be freaking out more than you already are, Lindsay teased, making Claire laugh out loud. The lightness of the moment brought the relief Claire didn't know she needed. A little later, Sophie appeared in the living room, already wearing her flower girl dress and clutching her beloved teddy bear. She twirled in the middle of the room, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Claire. Mommy, do I look like a princess? Claire felt her heart melt. She knelt to her daughter's level, straightening a slightly crooked bow. You look more beautiful than any princess, Sophie. You're perfect. Sophie beamed, hugging her teddy bear tightly. And you, Mommy? Well, you look pretty too. Claire glanced at the dress hanging on the closet door and smiled. I'll try to look as pretty as you, my love. Sophie stepped closer, her little voice dropping to a whisper. I'm so happy for you, Mommy. Uncle Ethan is going to make you so happy, right? Claire swallowed the lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the simplicity and love in her daughter's words. Yes, sweetheart, he will. And the three of us are going to be so happy together. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and returned to spinning in her dress. Claire watched her for a moment, realizing the depth of that moment. Everything she was doing, all of it, was for Sophie, for their future. By noon, Claire was ready. She stood in front of the mirror, wearing the simple, elegant dress she had chosen, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The woman reflected back at her wasn't just a bride. She was someone who had fought every battle to stand where she was now. Lindsay walked into the room and stopped in her tracks, visibly moved. Claire, you look stunning. Claire turned, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, Lindsay, for everything. Lindsay took her hands, her voice soft and full of love. You deserve every ounce of this happiness, Claire. Now let's go. Someone very special is waiting for you at the altar. Claire laughed softly, the nervousness mingling with a joy she'd never felt before. Let's go. Sophie came running into the room, clutching the little pillow with the rings. Mommy, I'm ready. Claire took her daughter's small hand, her heart overflowing with love. Then let's go together, princess. They left the apartment, Lindsay walking alongside them, heading to the waiting car. As they drove through the city toward the wedding venue, Claire gazed out the window, feeling like each passing moment was bringing her closer to the future she had always dreamed of. I'm ready, Claire thought, a quiet smile on her lips. The church was decorated with white flowers and subtle touches of green, creating a space that was simple, elegant, and warm, exactly as Claire had imagined. The sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting soft colors onto the floor and pews. In the back room, Claire sat in front of a large mirror while Lindsay finished adjusting her veil. There. Perfect. You look beautiful, Claire, Lindsay said, her eyes glistening with tears. Claire gazed at her reflection. The simple dress fit perfectly, and the veil added a delicate grace that matched the soft smile on her lips. For the first time, when Claire looked at herself, she saw someone strong, happy and whole. Lindsay knelt in front of her, taking her hands gently. Listen, I know you're nervous, but I just want to remind you of one thing. You deserve this. You fought to get here, and now it's time to live every single second of this day. It's your moment. Claire took a deep breath, letting Lindsay's words calm her. Thank you, Lindsay, for always being here. Before Lindsay could respond, the door creaked open softly, and Sophie entered, carrying the small pillow with the rings. Her eyes lit up when she saw her mother. Mommy, you look like a princess. Claire laughed quietly, pulling her daughter into a hug. And you, my princess, are you ready? Sophie nodded proudly. I'm the guardian of the rings. Claire kissed her daughter's forehead, holding her small hands. Then let's go together. It's time. The music began softly, echoing through the space. Claire stood at the entrance of the church, staring down the long white aisle that led to the altar, where Ethan was already waiting. Sophie walked ahead, slow and careful, holding the pillow with the rings. When she reached the altar, she looked up at Ethan and smiled, making him chuckle softly. The guests rose to their feet as Claire took her first step forward. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it filled the entire room. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Her eyes locked on Ethan, standing at the altar, his expression one of pure joy and love. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, as if he were seeing the most important person in his world. Every step Claire took felt like a silent goodbye to the past. With each movement forward, she felt the weight of old fears and doubts lift away. When she reached the altar, Ethan extended his hand to her. "You look beautiful," he whispered, holding her hand gently. Claire smiled, feeling steady and safe. "Thank you for waiting for me." Ethan's voice softened. "I would have waited forever." The church fell into a hushed silence. The officiant turned to Ethan, who held Claire's hands tightly as he began to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "Claire, when I met you, I saw a woman who had carried the weight of the world alone for far too long. But what made me fall in love with you was the strength with which you chose to fight, to rise, and to believe in love again. Today I promise to be your safe harbor. I promise to love you, to support you, and to never let go of your hand, no matter what." Tears slid down Claire's cheeks as she looked at him, those words filling every empty space the past had left behind. She took a deep breath and began her vows. "Ethan, you came into my life when I didn't believe in anything anymore. You showed me that love can be gentle, that it can be a home. Thank you for accepting me as I am, with all my scars. Today, I promise to love you, to walk by your side, and to care for our family, because it's with you that I feel whole." Ethan's eyes glistened, and around the room, guests discreetly wiped their tears. "Do you, Claire, take Ethan to be your husband?" the officiant asked. Claire smiled, her voice steady and clear. "I do." "And do you, Ethan, take Claire to be your wife?" Ethan smiled warmly, squeezing her hand softly. "I do." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Ethan leaned forward and kissed Claire tenderly, while Sophie ran up to them, her laughter filling the air as she hugged them both. "Mommy, Uncle Ethan, you did it." Claire wrapped her arms around her daughter, laughing and crying all at once. She looked at Ethan and thought, "We made it. Finally, we're at peace." The reception was simple but filled with love. Friends and family toasted, danced, and smiled all around Claire and Ethan. Lindsay gave an emotional speech, celebrating Claire's strength. Claire is proof that, even after the hardest times, love and courage always win. And Ethan, you are the gift she deserved. Claire looked around the room, her heart overflowing. Margareth sat discreetly at the back, finally respecting the space Claire had created. Adam, on the other hand, had no place there. He belonged to a past that no longer mattered. Ethan pulled Claire onto the dance floor, holding her close in his arms. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Ethan?" Claire laughed softly, resting her head against his chest. "I'm happy, truly happy." They danced quietly as Sophie twirled around them, her giggles echoing like music. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and love, Claire knew this was the life she had fought for, and it was only the beginning of something beautiful. The soft sound of birds filled the air on that spring morning. Sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the living room of a simple but lively home. On the table, fresh flowers stood in a vase, colorful drawings were scattered, and toys were neatly tucked into a corner. Claire stood in the kitchen making breakfast. She wore comfortable clothes and hummed quietly to herself, something she hadn't done in years. The smell of pancakes filled the house just as Sophie entered, clutching her teddy bear. "Good morning, Mommy," Sophie said. her hair still tousled from sleep. Claire smiled, kneeling down to hug her tightly. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Sophie nodded, her eyes lighting up as she noticed the stack of pancakes. "You made my favorite breakfast." "Of course. Today is a special day," Claire replied with a playful wink. Sophie looked around curiously and asked, "Where's Uncle Ethan?" Before Claire could answer, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a silly apron and holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, my two favorite girls." Sophie ran into his arms, and Claire stood back, watching them with a warm smile. The scene felt so natural, so light, as though life had finally found its perfect rhythm. After breakfast, Claire, Ethan, and Sophie went for a walk in the park. Sophie ran through the grass, blowing bubbles that floated and danced in the wind. Claire and Ethan strolled side by side, watching her with contented smiles. "You know, I never thought life could be like this," Claire said, her gaze fixed on Sophie. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You earned this, Claire. Every bit of this peace is because of you." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I don't think I truly understood happiness until now. It doesn't have to be big, you know? It's these moments, these little things." Ethan stopped walking and turned to look at her. "They might be small, but they're everything." Claire looked into his eyes, moved, and kissed him softly. They were interrupted by Sophie's excited voice. "Mommy, Uncle Ethan, look. I made a flower crown." Sophie ran up to them and carefully placed the crown on Claire's head. "Now you're the queen of our family." Claire knelt to her daughter's height, holding her tiny hands. "And you're the most special princess in the world," Sophie giggled, wrapping her arms around both of them. Ethan smiled as he looked at the two of them. "You two are my whole world." The moment seemed to freeze there, in an embrace that felt like the ultimate seal of the peace and love they had worked so hard to build. That evening, after putting Sophie to bed, Claire and Ethan sat on the porch, under a sky full of stars. A light breeze blew, and the silence was comforting. Claire cradled a mug of tea, staring up at the stars. "Can you believe all of this started when I thought I'd never begin again?" she said softly. Ethan turned to her, a calm smile on his face. "Sometimes, the best new beginnings come from the hardest places. You're proof that it's possible to find light after so much darkness." Claire nodded, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me." "I love you, Claire." She smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I love you too. And I love the life we're building." They sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, as the starry sky stretched above them. A quiet reminder that life, despite all its struggles, can also be beautiful and full of love. The next morning, Claire sat at her desk, writing in a new journal. The camera zoomed in slowly as her voice echoed in narration. "For so long, I carried burdens that weren't mine. I lived with fear, convinced I didn't deserve happiness. But I've learned that happiness isn't something we find. It's something we build day by day. Sometimes, it comes in the form of simple smiles, quiet mornings, or a hand that holds ours at just the right moment. And even though the past tried to break me, I chose to move forward. Today I am free, and that's all that matters." Claire closed the journal, a soft smile on her face. She glanced out the window and saw Sophie playing in the garden with Ethan, their laughter filling the air. Standing up, Claire walked outside to join them. The camera slowly pulled back, showing the family together under the morning sun. A picture of peace, love, and the fresh start Claire had always dreamed of.